Hi everyone, Victor here again, and I welcome you to this chapter, which is deploying your first application on OpenShift using ad hoc. In one of the previous chapters, we learned about some Kubernetes and OpenShift components and features such as node, pods, and etc. In this chapter, we will also learn about some other OpenShift objects or component or features such as project, deployment, deployment config, replica set, and replication controllers. In this lesson, we will be deploying our first application, and as we have learned in one of the previous lessons that your applications or container image resides in a pod. So basically, deploying an application simply means creating a pod. So to deploy an application in OpenShift, the first thing you need to do is to log into the OpenShift cluster. And to do that, you can use the command oc login user, which is the cube admin, and the password, which is -p. So this is the password, and this URL, which is this. So I'm going to be logging in as the cube admin. So if I press enter, so it's trying to log us in. You can see that here it's saying login successful, and it also says that I have access to 65 projects and using project default, meaning that we are using the default project. So what is project? Project is an organizational feature of OpenShift that allows you to group your resources. Some technology will call it organization unit, some will call it resource group, and even in Kubernetes, it is called namespace. And don't forget that OpenShift is built on top of Kubernetes, so you will always get to see this used interchangeably. So I'll be using namespace and I'll also be using project interchangeably. And I'll also be dropping the link to my Kubernetes course in the description section below if you're interested in it. To see all the projects available on this cluster, you can use the command oc project. So you can see that we have a whole lot of projects available, and you can also see that we are using the default project on this cluster. So we have a whole lot of them. If you want to count them, you can just pipe this to the wc command, and you can see that we have about 69 projects, and we have access according to here to this outline. We have access to just 65 projects. You can also see the asterisk here on the default project, meaning that we are making use of the default project. So you can make use of the default project if you want to, but because I don't want to, I'll be creating a new project. And to do that, I can use the command oc new project. So I can give any name of the project I want to give. So I'll be calling this project app project. So it's trying to create a new project. And now you can see that this project has been created. You can see that it's saying that we are now using project app project. And you can also see some other information about the project. And if I want to confirm if this project has been created, I can use the command oc project. So you can see now that it's saying that we're using the project app project. So let's look for the asterisk. You can see now that we have the asterisk on app project. Like I said, that deploying an application simply means creating a pod. And there are a lot of ways to create a pod on OpenShift. Just as we learned in my Kubernetes course that a pod can be created as an individual object and by using deployment, the same is applicable in OpenShift. So to create a pod in OpenShift, you can 1. Create a pod as an individual object, and 2. You can create a pod by using deployment, and 3. You can create a pod by using deployment config, and 4. You can also create a pod by using the new app option. I am sure by now different ideas will be running in our minds, like how and when should I know which way is better in creating the sport? Okay, let's break this down. I am going to start with what deployment is. A deployment is a layer over a pod. It's a collection of some set of pods and other resources, and using deployment to create a pod manages the applications or pods holistically because the pod will be managed by deployment accompanied with other resources and features that comes with deployment. And one of these features is the replica set. So the replica set is responsible for the replications or replicas of a pod. So if you want to increase or decrease the quantity of a pod accordingly, the replica set allows you to do that. And with deployment, you don't have to create the replica set features separately. The replica set will automatically be created and managed by the deployment. With deployment, you will also have the benefit of doing an automatic update, pod update, and you can also easily roll back to the previous update if the update is not compatible. On the contrary, creating a pod as a single object will not give you all these benefits of using deployment to create a pod, just like I mentioned. So you can choose which is suitable for you, creating a pod as an individual object or creating a pod using deployment. Well, out of these two ways, creating a pod with deployment is better, finer, fine-grained, and more realistic than creating a pod as a single object. However, there are some tests you might want to quickly carry out. In that sense, we can create a pod as an individual object. Having understood what deployment is, let's understand what deployment config is. Deployment config is an OpenShift object. It is strictly an OpenShift object, and the deployment config object is very similar to the deployment object. They do the same thing, they achieve the same goal, just that they do it using slightly different methods. For example, one of the features that comes with creating deployment is replica set, while that of the deployment config is replication controller. And the replica set and replication controller basically do the same thing and achieve the same goal, which is managing the quantities of pods accordingly. The replica set is just a successor of the replication controller. And the common question I often get is, Victor, do I use deployment or do I use deployment config? Well, Red Hat has advised that we should try as much as possible to always use deployment because deployment serves as a descendant of the deployment config. However, if you need a specific feature of the deployment config object, you can make use of the deployment config. Otherwise, make use of deployment. I won't go deep into their specific features and how their behaviors works for now, but if you are curious to know how they work, I'll be dropping the link in the description section below so you can click on the link and you can learn more about the deployment config. And as we go on in this course, I will show you how their behaviors works practically, probably in the second part of this course. And lastly, a pod can be created by using the OC command with the new app option. This is one of the easiest and arguably the best way of creating a pod in OpenShift because the OC new app command automatically creates a deployment which will be used to manage the pods. In the older version of the OpenShift, the new app option usually creates a deployment config, but in the newer version, it now creates a deployment. And like I've explained, Red Hat advises that we should use deployment at all times instead of the deployment config. And I know by now, someone watching this video is already asking me in his mind that why should I use the new app option to create a pod when I can use the deployment straight away because the new app option also creates deployment. All right, to answer your question, the new app option does not only create deployment, it also creates service for you. And I will talk about what services are in the next chapter. But before the next chapter, we have been doing some explanations since by talking. So why not let's go practical? To create a pod as an individual object, we're going to use the command oc run. So I'm going to give the name of the pod. So I'm going to call the pod Nginx application, and I'm going to say that you should download the Nginx image, and by default the image is going to be downloaded from the Docker hub. So if I say enter, you can see now that the pod Nginx app has been created. So if I want to get an information about the pod, I can just say oc get pods. So you can see now that the pod is already running. And if I want to get a wider information, I can just say put this output to a wider information. So you can see that this is the name of the pod, and you can see that the status is running. You can see the internal IP of the pod, and of course you can see the node where the pod is running. And don't forget that we are using a single node cluster, meaning that we have both our master node and our worker node running on the same node. So if I want to get more information about this pod, I can say oc describe pod Nginx app. So this is going to give me more information about the pod. So if I scroll up, let's scroll up a bit. So you can see the name of the pod here. You can also see the namespace. Like I told you that in Kubernetes, the organization of resources is done by namespace, and while in OpenShift it's called project. And you can now see that, like I told you, that we're going to be using these names interchangeably. So this is the project or namespace, and the name is called app project. You can see the node where this pod is running on. You can see the timestamp. You can also see the labels. Later on in this course, we're going to talk about labels and annotations. So if you scroll down more, you can see the status of the pod. You can see the internal IP of the pod. You can see the containers that is in the pod. And if you scroll down, you can also see, let's scroll down, you can see the event, which is the logs. You can see that at the time the image was being pulled and it was being successfully pulled. And you can see that at the time the container was being created and at the time the container was being started. And for us to test that the app has been successfully deployed, we need to log in to the node where the application resides. and in our case, it resides on the OpenShift local or CRC node. And just to reiterate the architecture we are using in our course again, we have our VM, or yours might be a physical laptop or a desktop, which is an external node to the OpenShift local or CRC node running as a VM in our hypervisor. And we are using the KVM hypervisor in this case. And it is in that CRC VM that the OpenShift cluster is deployed on. So to be able to do our test, we need to log into the OpenShift local or CRC node or VM. And to get the CRC node IP, we can use the command oc get nodes. All right, I can only see that we have the CRC node, of course, which is running as both the master and the worker, but I can't get the IP here. So I think CRC IP should be able to give me the IP of the CRC node. Yes. So you can see the IP of the CRC node here. So we need to log in into this node. And before I log in into this node, I need to get the IP of the container or of the pod again. So if I do this command, you can see the IP of the container or pod here. So what I'm going to do now is to log in into the CRC node. So with this command, I'll be able to log into the CRC node. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be dropping the link to this particular lesson, the documentation link to this particular lesson in the description box below, so you can easily click on it and do a copy and paste like I've done. So what I just did is to SSH into this node. You can see what I did at this node IP and as the user core, and that's what I'm going to be using to log in into this CRC node. So if I press enter, so we are logging in into the node. So you can see now that we've been able to log into the CRC node with this IP, with this core user, and we are in the node now. And what I'm going to do is to do my test. And so if I do call on the IP of the pod, so I'm just going to copy this IP and I'm going to paste it here. So now you can see that we can get the output welcome to Nginx, meaning that the Nginx application is successfully deployed. If you understand normal basic web application like Nginx or Apache, whenever you want to do your test, when you get sweet outputs like this, it means that you have done the right thing. And I'll also be dropping the link to the basic Apache and Nginx configuration. If you wish to learn about it, I'll be dropping the link in the description section below. And if you remember correctly, in one of the previous chapters, I told you that the default container runtime that the OpenShift uses is the CRIO. And of course, you can also check the other containers that are running in this container runtime. So for example, if I want to check, I can just say sudo crictl, which is the client that is always used to query the CRIO container runtime. Unlike Docker, of course, you use the Docker, and for Podman, of course, you use Podman. But for CRIO, so I'm going to be using crictl, so I can check the containers that are running in this container runtime. And you can see that we have a whole lot of containers running in this container runtime. We can also check for, we can grep for the container that we just created, which is Nginx. So you can also see that the Nginx container is running in here and is running for about 35 minutes ago. So now I can exit out of this node, and then I am back to my VM, and yours might be your physical node. So we are back to our rather external node. Having learned how to create a pod as a single object, now let's learn how to create a pod using deployment. So what we're going to do is to clean up this environment by deleting the pod that we just created. So if I say get pods, we created the Nginx app pod. And before I delete this pod, I want to quickly do something. Okay, I want to do call to this IP address. So you can see that we are not getting any output. I want you to put this information on your right palm. We're going to explain what's happening here in the next chapter. So now let's delete this pod that we just created. And to do that, I'm going to say delete pod Nginx app. So you can see that the pod has been deleted. Okay, let's wait for the cursor to drop down. All right, so now I'm going to confirm if we have any pod running on this cluster. So I can say get pods. So you can see now that it's saying that no resources found in the app project namespace. Don't forget that we are, of course, using the app project namespace, which we have created. Let me just clear my screen, and now let us look at how to create a pod by using deployment. To create a pod by using deployment, use the command create deployment, and you give the name of the deployment. In this case, I'm going to say Nginx app, and I'm going to say that it should pull the image. It should pull this Nginx image, and like I said, that the image is going to be automatically and by default pulled from the Docker hub. And if I say enter, you can see now that the deployment Nginx app has been created. So if I say get deployment, you can see now that the deployment has been created. However, of course, the deployment is ready. However, the container is not running yet. And if I say get deployment again, you can now see that the Nginx container is now running inside of this deployment, and the deployment is going to be used to manage the Nginx pod. So if I say get pods, you can see that the pod has been created, and it's giving it at the suffix, it's giving it a random name, but for the prefix, it's telling you that this pod was actually created from creating this deployment, and that means that the pod is going to be managed by the deployment, and you can see that the pod is running. So if you want to get more information about the pod rather, so you can just say get pods wide. So this is going to give you the internal IP of the pod, and it will also give you the node where the pod is running on. And of course, you can say describe pod. So I need to copy the name of the pod. So this is going to also give you information about the pod. And if you scroll up here, let's scroll up, you can see that the namespace is app project. This is the node, this is the start time, labels, annotations. I'm trying to get something here. Let me scroll up a bit. Okay, so this is the information about the pod. I was trying to get the deployment. So I want to say describe describe deployment, Nginx app, oops, also describe Nginx app, also describe deployment. What's it saying? Deployment.apps not found. Also describe deployment. So what deployment did we create then? Also get deployment. Oops, I didn't I didn't have the N here. Okay, so this is the deployment we created. All right, I just want you to see some information about the deployment here. So you can see the name of the deployment, the namespace, the labels, like I said, when you create a pod with by using deployment, it comes with the replica set. So you can see that we have the replicas here, we have the strategy type, we have the labels. We'll talk about labels, we'll talk about selector later on in this course. So this is the information, this is the logs that we got when we were creating the deployment. So this is the way you can create a pod by using deployment in OpenShift. So what I'm going to do now is to clean up this again, and we are also going to look at how to create a pod by using the deployment config. So I'm just going to say OC delete deployment Nginx app. So if I say OC get deployment, so you can see that we don't have any resource anymore. And of course, if I say OC get pods, you can see that we don't have any resources here anymore. So now let us look at how to create a pod by using the deployment config. To create a pod by using the deployment config, you can just use the command OC create deployment config. I can just shorten it as DC, and if you wish to type, you can just write deployment config. So I'm going to call the name of this deployment config Nginx app, and I'm going to say you should pull the Nginx image. So you can now see that the deployment config has been created. So if I do OC get deployment config, you can see that I have the deployment config being created. And if I say OC get port, so you can see now that, so this is what is happening. The deployer pod is running, and now this pod is being created, which is the Nginx app. So we're going to wait for this Nginx app to be fully created. And now you can now see that the deployer pod has completed, and now we have the Nginx app running here. So if I want to get more information, of course, I can say OC get pods wide. So you can see the IP address of the deployer pod. You can also see the IP address of the pod, of the Nginx pod that is running. So for deployment config object, it can have at most one deployer pod running, otherwise multiple deployers end up conflicting. So if I want to get the description of this guy, I can say also describe deployment config Nginx app. So if I scroll up, you can also see the information here, the selector, the replicas, of course, one. You can see the labels here. So I can scroll up and scroll down. And of course, if you can always log into the CRC node and then check if Nginx was properly created or properly deployed. But because we've done that, when we created a pod as a single object, so just to save time, I'm not going to do that any longer. So now let's clean up this and let's see how to create a pod by using the new app option with the OC command. So for me to clean up this, I'm just going to say OC delete deployment config nginx app. So you can see that the deployment config has been deleted. And if I say OC get deployment config, I can't see this anymore. And if I say OC get ports, let's see, I can't see any ports here any longer. So what we're going to do lastly in this chapter is to create a deployment by using the OC new app command. And to do that, we use the command OC new app image. I want to pull the Nginx image and I'm going to give it a name, Nginx app. So it's creating, it's telling us some warnings. All right, so you can see here, found container, blah, blah, success, run OC status to view your applications. So to be able to see that this has been created, so I can say OC get pods. So you can now see that the pod Nginx is running. And like I told you that the OC new app command will automatically create a deployment for us. So if I say OC get deployment, so you can see that we have the Nginx app deployment. And also I said that the OC new app command would also create a service for us. So if I say OC get service, you can see that we have a service type, which is the cluster IP service that the OC new app command has created for us. And that was why I said that arguably OC new app is the best command to use to create a pod in OpenShift. And of course, if you want to get more information about the pod, you can say also describe the name of the pod. And if you want to get more information about the service, of course, you can say OC describe. So service, I can just use the shortening form of SVC, and I'm going to say Nginx app. So it's also going to give you the information about the service. And also, you know that before we can log into this, before we can do our test, rather, we needed to log into the CRC node. And I must tell you that doesn't make sense, um, for people to be able to connect to your applications, to your web applications, they don't have to log into your node for them to be able to access your web applications. So in the next chapter, we're going to see how to access an application externally where we don't have to log into the node where the application resides before we can access the application. And that boils down to understanding what service route is and how the networking technology of OpenShift works. So thank you for watching, and I plead that you should please, what am I saying? Okay, I plead you should subscribe to this channel, like, share, comment, and if you do this, you would encourage us to do more of this video. And thank you for watching once more, and bye for now.